Hello and welcome to Everything Fear, your one-stop shop for all things horror. I'm Kit Tinsley. I'm a horror author, film academic and general horror geek. If you enjoy this video, if you could please give us a like, subscribe and maybe tickle that bell icon to be notified when we upload future content, that would be great, thank you. As you can see, today we're not in the usual Everything Fear studio. That's because today this is the first episode of a new series called Horror History. In this series, I'm going to be taking a deep dive into legends and folklore that inspired horror characters, horror creatures, films, deep dives into the making of movies, and biographies of major figures in the horror genre. This first episode is a biography of the late great Peter Cushing. Peter Wilton Cushing was born on the 26th of May 1913 in the town of Kenley in Surrey. His father was George Edward Cushing and his mother Nellie Marie Cushing. He was the youngest of two boys. His elder brother George was 3 years older than him. His father was a quantity surveyor from an upper-class British family. His mother was the daughter of a carpet merchant and was of a lower class than her husband. Cushing would say that he never really knew his father because, like most upper-class men of that time, he was reserved and uncommunicative. His mother, Nellie, was so sure she was going to have a girl when she was pregnant with Peter and was so desperate for a girl that for the first few years of his life, she used to dress Peter in frilly dresses. She grew out his hair in long curls and used to tie them up in pink ribbons, to the point where people thought he was a girl for the first few years of his life. During the First World War, the family lived in Dulwich, but they moved to Purley in South London in 1918, following the end of the First World War. During his childhood, Peter was quite sickly. On several occasions, he contracted pneumonia and even double pneumonia, which at the time was quite often fatal, but luckily Peter survived. Cushing said that he always wanted to be an actor, even before he knew what that really was. This was because he always loved playing dress-up and make-believe as a child. During one of his early Christmases, Peter attended a stage production of Peter Pan, and this is believed to be one of the biggest inspirations on him wanting to be a professional actor. Peter used to put on puppet shows with finger puppets for his family and family friends to earn pocket money to spend on the comic books and toys that he loved so much. Like most boys of his social standing, Peter was sent off to boarding school in Shoreham-by-Sea on the Sussex coast. However, his intense homesickness caused his parents to bring him back after just one term. He was enrolled in the local grammar school in Purley, and that's where he completed his school days. Whilst at school, Cushing enjoyed taking part in many sports, including swimming, cricket and rugby. Academically though, the only subject he really connected with was art. Everything else he felt he was a poor student at. He attained reasonable grades, although he admitted that this was mostly down to the fact that George, his elder brother, who was more academically gifted than Peter, did most of his work for him. It was while at school though that the physics teacher, DJ Davies, who also produced all of the school's plays and productions, noticed Cushing's talent, ambition and passion for acting, and he actively encouraged this, casting Peter in leading roles in countless plays while he was at the school, and also allowing him time off from lessons to help with set painting and set building. After leaving school, Peter wanted to pursue a career in acting, but his father was dead set against this. He used Peter's love of art as a tool to get him a job. Using his own connections, he got him a job as an assistant in the drawing room of a quantity surveyor. Peter hated the job. In the 3 years he was there, he never got a promotion or any form of advancement. The only part of the job he enjoyed was the actual drawing, but his drawings were usually rejected by his employers because they were too fanciful, expensive, creative. During this time, his former teacher, DJ Davies, allowed Peter to return to the school to take part in productions. Peter would often come up with excuses to go up to the attic to rehearse his lines to hide the fact that he was in the plays from his father. He was also constantly applying for auditions through the trade papers. Peter eventually applied for a scholarship to the Guild School of Music and Drama in London. He was auditioned by actor Alan Ainsworth, who was not at all impressed with Cushing's manner of speaking. In fact, he told Peter not to bother returning until he'd improved his diction. Peter, however, refused to give up. He sent exactly 21 letters to the school applying for the scholarship, until eventually actor and stage manager Bill Fraser agreed to meet with him, just basically to ask him to stop sending letters. It was during this meeting that Peter was given a walk-on part in that night's production of J.B. Priestley's Cornelius. It was a small role with no lines, and basically all he had to do was stand there behind the other actors. But this constituted Peter's first professional acting job. After the production, Peter was given a scholarship to the Guild School of Music and Drama, and he was also given odd jobs like selling refreshments and assistant stage managing. In 1936, Peter took a job with Southampton Rep as an assistant stage manager, but he also would play bit parts in their productions. In fact, in the 3 years he was with the company, he amassed an outstanding 100 different roles. But by 1939, Peter was hungering for more. He decided it was time to go to America and try and make it in Hollywood films. In an act of support, his father bought him a one-way ticket to Hollywood. Cushing moved there with no more than £50 to his name. Once there, he met a man called Larry Goodkind, who worked for Columbia Pictures. He gave Cushing a letter of recommendation and directed him to the company Edward Small Productions, who were about to start work on an adaptation of Alexander Dumas' novel The Man in the Iron Mask, directed by another horror legend, James Whale, who of course directed Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein for Universal Studios. Cushing was hired as a stand-in for the scenes where both characters, played by Lewis Hayward, were needed. Cushing would film one side of the conversation against Hayward, and then they would switch. Basically, the two scenes would be put together using split screen, essentially cutting Peter out of the film entirely. Whale, though, did give him a small role as a king's messenger, though he had no experience of fencing whatsoever. Because the role required sword fighting, Cushing told Whale that he was an expert fencer, so he was a bit of a blagger, but it paid off because The Man in the Iron Mask, 1939, turned out to be Peter Cushing's film debut. A few days after filming on The Man in the Iron Mask wrapped, Cushing heard that producer Hal Roach was looking for an English actor to play a part in the new Laurel and Hardy movie. He sought out the role and was cast in the part. Although he's only in A Chump at Oxford for a few scenes, he said it was worth it to star against two of the greatest comedians that cinema had ever produced. It was around this time that actor Robert Coote, who had met Cushing during a cricket match, recommended him to George Stevens for his upcoming film Vigil in the Night. This was a drama starring Carole Lombard about a nurse working in a poorly equipped country hospital. Cushing was cast in the second male lead, playing the husband of Lombard's sister. The film was released in 1940, and this was the first time that Cushing got any sort of attention and critical praise. Cushing would work in a few more Hollywood movies. He starred in a short film called The Hidden Master, about young Clive of India. The film was set long before the character became the famous military man with the supremacy of the East India Company, and told the story of a time that Clive tried to commit suicide by shooting himself. He fired the gun at his own head twice, and it didn't go off. A third time, he shot it at a vase, and the gun fired. It was at this moment that Clive realised he wasn't meant to die, and perhaps he was meant for something else. Studio executives were incredibly happy with Cushing's performance, so much so that there were rumours that they were grooming him for stardom. Despite this though, Peter was growing homesick again. He moved to New York, where he took radio roles and some theatre work, before eventually returning home. Cushing came home to England during World War II. His childhood illnesses and injuries meant that he wasn't qualified for active service, but he wanted to do his part. A friend suggested that he join the Entertainment's National Service Association, or ENSA, to entertain the troops. In 1942, the play Private Lives by Noel Coward was touring military bases and military hospitals throughout the UK. The actor who was cast in the lead was called up for military service, and with very little time to prepare, Cushing took the role. He was paid £10 a week, but he completed the tour. It was here that he met Helen Beck, a former dancer and actress. The two of them fell in love and were married on the 10th of April 1943. Eventually, Cushing had to leave ENSA due to suffering from lung congestion. Helen left as well to look after her husband and nurse him back to health. During this time, the couple had very little money and had to rely on national assistance and the Actors Benevolent Fund to survive. Cushing found it incredibly difficult to get roles around this time. In the autumn of 1946, after the war ended, Cushing unsuccessfully auditioned for the role of Paul Verrill in a stage production of Born Yesterday, being directed by legendary actor and director Laurence Olivier. Olivier wanted the role to be played with an American accent, and Cushing said he couldn't do one. He tried, but it wasn't very successful. Olivier said, "Well, I appreciate you not wasting my time. I will remember you." Nearing middle age and finding it difficult to get work, Cushing was starting to feel like a failure. In 1947, Laurence Olivier proved true to his word and sought out Cushing for a role in his film version of Hamlet. Far from being deterred by the actor's previous bad audition, Olivier was keen to cast Cushing in a role. Unfortunately, the only role left to fill was that rather small role of the rather foppish Osric. Cushing took the role, and Hamlet 1948 marked Cushing's British film debut. Interestingly, the film also starred Christopher Lee, who would go on to be a frequent co-star and lifelong friend of Cushing. Though a small role, Cushing gained praise for playing Osric. After the success of Hamlet, Cushing and his wife Helen were both invited to join Laurence Olivier's theatre company, the Old Vic, with whom Cushing would play numerous roles. However, Cushing struggled to find film work during this time, and he became so stressed that he felt like he was suffering from a prolonged nervous breakdown. It was Helen that suggested perhaps he should look into television. She suggested that he contacted all of the producers listed in the Radio Times magazine to try and find out if there was work available for him there. It was a wise move that paid off, and Cushing was hired to complement the cast of a number of live television performances of stage successes. He gained praise for his portrayal of Mr. Darcy in the BBC's first adaptation of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, but perhaps his most successful TV role was playing the part of Winston Smith in Nigel Kneale's adaptation of George Orwell's novel 1984. This was a live stage televised production, and it turned out to be quite a controversial one, with the director receiving death threats and people criticising Cushing for taking part in such filth. There was even talk of the government trying to enact an Act of Parliament to stop the BBC from airing the repeat performance. This was unsuccessful, however, and the performance went ahead, and Cushing won great praise and acting awards for his portrayal of Winston Smith. Interestingly, he said that the first night was his best performance, but only the second night still survives today. In the 2 years following the adaptation of 1984, Cushing starred in 31 television plays and 2 serials, and won Best Television Actor of the Year from the Evening Chronicle. He also won the Best Actor Award from the Guild of Television Producers in 1955, and from the British Academy for Film and Television Arts in 1956. Cinematic roles, though, were still a problem, as many producers at the time were resentful of television actors, feeling that they were taking audiences away from cinemas. During a break in his television work, Cushing heard that a studio called Hammer were looking to make a new adaptation of Mary Shelley's classic novel Frankenstein. Cushing had been a big fan of the novel in his childhood and really wanted to play the character of Victor Frankenstein. He told his agent to contact Hammer and let them know of his interest in the role. What he didn't know was that Hammer were as keen to work with him as he was to play the part. In fact, they'd sought him out for roles before but never heard anything back. Cushing was about 20 years older than Baron Frankenstein was in the novel, but this didn't bother him or Hammer, and Cushing was cast in the role. The Curse of Frankenstein, 1967, marked the first of 22 times that Cushing starred in Hammer films. He later said that his career decisions entailed selecting roles that he thought the audience would want to see him in. He said, "Who wants to see me as Hamlet? Very few. But millions want to see me as Baron Frankenstein. So that's the role I take." Unlike the Universal Frankenstein in 1931, this version revolved pretty much mainly around Baron Frankenstein rather than his creation. Screenwriter Jimmy Sangster wrote the character as an ambitious, egotistical, and coldly intellectual scientist who despised all of his contemporaries. In a change from previous versions, including the novel, Cushing's Frankenstein commits vicious crimes to attain his goals, like killing a colleague to get a brain for his creature. The Curse of Frankenstein also featured Christopher Lee as the monster. Cushing and Lee became extremely close friends over the years, and remained so for the rest of Cushing's life. They first met on the set of the film, and Hammer's publicity department put out a story that they first met while Lee was in his monster makeup, and that Cushing was so terrified he actually screamed. Whether this is true or not, or just studio spin, I don't know. Cushing so valued preparation that he insisted on being trained by a surgeon on how to correctly use a scalpel. Shot in dynamic colour, the film became known for its heavy usage of gore and its overt sexuality. The film did incredibly well at the box office with its target audience, but the critics were less impressed. However, most were complimentary of Cushing's performance, saying that it added an air of distinction and credibility to the film. The Curse of Frankenstein was an overnight success and brought both Cushing and Lee worldwide fame. Cushing would reprise his role of Victor Frankenstein in 5 sequels: The Revenge of Frankenstein, The Evil of Frankenstein, Frankenstein Created Woman, Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, and Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. In that last film, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, Cushing played the character as gone completely and utterly insane. This seemed like a fitting coda to his performance in the original movie. When Hammer sought to adapt Bram Stoker's classic vampire novel, Dracula, they sought out Cushing to play Dracula's adversary, his nemesis, Dr. Van Helsing. Cushing envisioned the character as an idealist warrior for the greater good. He went to the source material, the novel, and studied the character deeply, and took many things from the book, including extending his index finger like this whenever he made a point. Christopher Lee was cast, of course, as the Count Dracula, so the two men starred together again. As with Curse of Frankenstein, Dracula was hugely successful at the box office, but critics disliked it for its violence and its overt sexuality. They deemed it to be inferior to the 1931 Universal version. Cushing reprised his role of Van Helsing in the first sequel, The Brides of Dracula, which interestingly didn't feature Lee or Dracula at all. But when it came to the third movie, they simply used archive footage of him. He would go on to star in Dracula AD 1972, The Satanic Rites of Dracula, and The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, which could have only been made in the 1970s, a kung fu vampire movie. Although most well known for his Frankenstein and Dracula roles, Cushing starred in countless other Hammer films over the years. In 1957 he starred in The Abominable Snowman. In 1959 he teamed up with Christopher Lee again for The Mummy. Also in 1959 he played Sherlock Holmes in Hammer's adaptation of the novel The Hound of the Baskervilles. This film really upped the horror elements of the original story. Cushing believed that his Sherlock Holmes in that film was the high point of his acting career. He believes it's the role he played best. The film was supposed to lead to a series of adaptations, but it wasn't successful enough, so they only made the Hound of the Baskervilles. He would also star in The Gorgon, Vampire Lovers, Twins of Evil, and Fear in the Night, amongst others. Outside of Hammer, he starred in the 1956 movie Alexander the Great as the Athenian general Memnon of Rhodes. He also starred in the science fiction films based on the BBC TV series Doctor Who, playing the Doctor. Though the scripts were based off the scripts for early William Hartnell stories, Cushing's Doctor differed in the fact that he was human and not an extraterrestrial. He played the character in two films, Doctor Who and the Daleks in 1965 and Dalek Invasion Earth 2150 AD in 1966. He also went on to star as Sherlock Holmes again for the BBC, playing the character in 15 episodes of the TV series Sherlock Holmes. Cushing starred in a handful of films for independent horror studio Amicus, including Dr. Terror's House of Horror, The Skull, and Torture Garden, as well as some non-Amicus horror movies such as Island of Terror, The Blood Beast Terror, and Corruption, a film that was marketed as being so horrific that no woman would be admitted alone. The next sort of major career high came in 1977, when director George Lucas asked Peter Cushing to play Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars. With the film's primary antagonist, Darth Vader, wearing a mask throughout the entire film, Lucas felt there needed to be a human face of evil within the film, and thus created Tarkin, a senior Imperial governor and commander of the battle station, the Death Star. Cushing said that Lucas originally approached him to play the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but upon meeting Cushing decided that he was a better fit for Tarkin. Cushing says, in hindsight, he wished he'd have got to play Obi-Wan Kenobi. Cushing got along very well with the rest of the cast, in particular his old Hammer co-star David Prowse, who was playing Darth Vader, and Carrie Fisher. In fact, Carrie Fisher said that she liked Cushing so much that she found it really hard to be horrible to him in those scenes where she first meets him. During the filming, Cushing was given a pair of boots that were 2 sizes too small for him and caused him excruciating pain to wear them. So it was soon agreed that the majority of his shots would be shot from at least the knees up, so that he could wear slippers while filming most of his scenes. When the film was released, Cushing was incredibly pleased with it and claimed that his only disappointment was that he got killed off and couldn't come back for a sequel. The film gave Cushing perhaps the highest visibility of any film of his career and inspired a whole new audience to seek out his older work. Cushing did get to reappear in the Star Wars universe in 2016 thanks to archive footage and digital technology when he was inserted into the film Rogue One. Towards the end of his career, critics claimed that Cushing was taking roles that were below his talent. In 1984 he starred in the spoof spy comedy Top Secret. And the fantasy film The Sword of Valiant. And in 1986 he starred in the World War II sci-fi time travel mix-up that was Biggles' Adventures in Time. In May 1982, Cushing was diagnosed with prostate cancer and was admitted to hospital. Doctors gave him 12 to 18 months left to live. To their surprise, Cushing recovered enough to go home without any operative treatment or chemotherapy. And although his health did continue to decline for the rest of his life, he did live for another 12 years. In August 1994, he admitted himself to the Pilgrim's Hospice in Canterbury, where he died on the 11th of August 1994 at the age of 81.
The actor Peter Cushing, the master of the Hammer House of Horror, died of cancer today at the age of 81. He terrified millions with his portrayal of characters like Baron Frankenstein, but he was loved by everyone. Tonight, his friend and colleague Christopher Lee said, "Filmgoers the world over would grieve deeply." ITN's Adam Holloway reports.
In accordance with his wishes, he had a small funeral for family and friends, although hundreds of fans did come down to Canterbury to pay their respects. Christopher Lee said of his friend's death, I don't want to sound gloomy, but at some point of your lives, every one of you will notice that you have that one person in your life, one friend whom you love and care for very much. That person is so close to you that there are some things that you share only with them. For example, you can call that friend, and from the very first maniacal laugh or some other joke, you instantly know who it is on the other end of the line. We used to do that with him so often. And then, when that person is gone, there will be nothing like that in your life ever again. Cushing inspired so many actors. His films are classics. He seemed like a genuinely nice man, a kind gentleman. He's gone, but he will never be forgotten. He left us with some amazing films that people are still discovering to this day. Thank you very much for joining us for this first episode of Horror History. There'll be another one in about a month's time. And until next time, stay scared and stay tuned.